We pretend, sometimes curators or museums pretend that the era of this is great is over, but I also think that any curator who doesn't have those thoughts probably shouldn't be trusted.
Well, when we were speaking just before about what is good or what is great, and there is I understand the emotional relation to that in terms of what talking about things and investigating art and how we look and think. And personally, I would tend to see there's a certain sense of sort of absolutism that I see sort of coming into that. And so rather than seeing something as sort of good or bad, I tend to reflect it more on as whether something is interesting or not. And for me, rather than just the emotional, which is always there, and the subjective.
I find Stephen's idea of interesting a term which really, to be fair to him, needs to be much more kind of contextualised. But it's a 21st century word of having nothing to discern, or it's interesting. What in the hell does that mean? I mean, we use it in ordinary parlance, but in this context, I just think it relates to the idea that you can't have a sense of pluralist views, which is open, but not have some fixed views as well. I mean, my idea of pluralism, which I've seen run through art schools and academies and so forth, is that when that pluralism pushes to the extreme, it becomes just nihilism, it becomes meaningless.
When it came to the question of pluralism, it struck me that, in say, entertaining pluralism, in a way what you're doing is acknowledging complexity, sort of social and cultural complexity. And that's really important to acknowledge. But I think in acknowledging that doesn't mean that one can't then make a choice to work in a particular way, speaking, for example, as a painter, which might seem in some ways like an unlikely activity to persist within contemporary culture, and nonetheless it persists quite strongly. And having made that kind of choice, one finds complexity within one's own discipline. So I think that relationship between, a kind of individual choice and complexity can be quite a rich one. It's not in making a choice that you discount other possibilities, but you make a choice so that you actually have a language with which to work and to work effectively.
When we've been talking about pluralistic art, has been about the intervention of the social into the discourse of art. So in the 60s, when you have site-specific work where the site is a location, and then the discussion and social context and political context of the location also enters the artwork, and that's one history of that practice. There would be others as well. So that, in a sense, while you're wanting to make the best work that you can, it's the point that Deborah's made, which is that it has to, have some conversation not with history but with the moment that you're living, and so that either as a painter is about very much that bodily engagement with the material and a kind of conversation with the object itself, and that would be for lots of people who have a material-based practice, and also for those who have a kind of social-based practice, is how is this work talking once it leaves my studio? How is it talking to its audience? How is it maybe having a conversation with social context and history? And for me, that's always been a way of an antidote to the nihilism that Idris has raised, and that, if you're kind of just caught in a discussion which is an internal discussion between yourself and your work without thinking the social context in which you're making it, that there is a danger of becoming very nihilistic and very self-focused. And that might be interesting to yourself and other artists, but what is the audience you want to talk to?